So I really hesitate actually to say that because I have the sense that there's a lot of joy and goodwill in this group, which is great to see. I'm Richard Rosengarten. I'm the Dean of the Divinity School, and it's a great honor and pleasure to welcome all of you. And by all of you, I mean the members of our visiting committee, the members of the Board of the Baptist Theological Union, faculty of all stripes, emeriti and current. I won't say active because I'll tell you later about how active our emeriti are. Students of all stripes, alums, welcome. My gosh, what a crowd of people. And just pals and friends of the institution of various stripes. This is really a great gathering, and it really, I have to say, says and spells Chicago across the room in a way that's very nice. So our program tonight has a couple of parts to it. What you're going to see right now is presentations by three esteemed alums and faculty about the Divinity School, reflecting, and the Baptist Theological Union, and they're going to explain to you what 125, 150 means. I have no idea, but they will tell you about this. And we'll have some time at the end of those presentations for conversation, and we hope that all of you will participate. And that doesn't just mean questions. That means comments, it means provocations, it means general thoughts. So I hope that you'll regard the presentations as an invitation to think with us about what this is and what it means and what it has meant to all of you. Then after that, we'll have some brief presentations, which will occur right here, and then a kind of social hour and reception. At 6:45, we'll have dinner. Now, dinner is in two places. And some of you will go to dinner in Bond Chapel, and some of you will dine here. And then after dinner, Professor Doniger and I are going to speak to both groups individually. So when we show up, pay attention, all right? There we go. So that's the plan for the evening. So our three speakers at this session are to my left, and I'm going to introduce all three of them now and then just yield the podium to each of them. But it's a delight to welcome them to the school. Larry Greenfield has a DB from 1966, an MA from 1970, and a PhD from 1978 in the Divinity School. He's the executive minister for the American Baptist Churches of Metro Chicago. He's the chair of the Baptist Theological Union Board of Trustees. He's a member of the Divinity School Visiting Committee. He was dean of students in the Divinity School from 1970 to 1980. And he was formerly the president of Colgate Rochester Bexley Hall Crozer Divinity School. So that's the short and sweet on Larry, and those of you who know Larry is that he's a lot more than that, but you'll see that in a few minutes. And then our second speaker is someone whom I have to give the longest introduction to because no one has any idea who he is, and that's Marty. It says on here, my little notes say PhD 1956, Fairfax M. Cone Distinguished Service Professor Emeritus of the History of Modern Christianity, and you all know the rest better than I. Marty is the author of over 50 books, thousands of articles. I think he is, without question, not only the preeminent historian of American religion, but the preeminent commentator on religion and an exemplar for the 21st century of what it can be at its best, and we're thrilled to have him with us today. Daniel L. Meyer is a Master of Arts in 1975 and a PhD in 1994 from the Social Sciences Division here in the university. He's the university archivist and director of the Special Collections Research Center here at the library at the University of Chicago. He wrote a dissertation on the Chicago faculty and the university ideal, 1891 to 1929. I thought that was all John Boyer's territory, but anyway. And it was advised by Neil Harris, our colleague in history, who's known to many of you who did American religious history here and others. He's also the co-author, I couldn't resist this, of Classic Country Estates of Lake Forest, Architecture and Landscape Design, 1856 to 1940. I don't think he's going to talk about that today, but I thought that was a nice little diversification. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone over to our speakers. I believe it's going to be Greenfield, Marty, and Meyer. They'll each talk for somewhere between 15 and 25 minutes, and then at the end of that, I will exhort you to conversation with them and yourselves. So welcome to our speakers.
Thank you, Rick. I've entitled these reflections, The Breaking of the Baptist Enigma at the University of Chicago and its Divinity School. The eminent historian of American religion and commentator on the role of religion in American life, Marty, coined the term Baptistification 32 years ago in an article that appeared not in the magazine with which he is most closely associated, the mainline to Progressive Christian Century, published here in Chicago, but in the more conservative, and one might claim as chief rival magazine, also published here in Chicago, Christianity Today. It was and remains an enigma why Marty would freely choose to contribute one of his most illuminating, and it turns out enduring interpretive concepts to the competition. By the time that article and that concept, Baptistification, appeared, I had taken leave from the University of Chicago Divinity School and settled in Rochester, New York, at another divinity school, one that, in uniting three previously separate Baptist seminaries, had played important roles in the creation and ongoing life of Chicago's divinity school, including its predecessor seminary, the Baptist Union Theological Seminary. More of that later. But I wasn't surprised or nonplussed by Marty's introduction of the term into both scholarly and popular analysis of American religion and American life. After all, I had the privilege of deaning with Marty under the leadership of the noted historian of religion, Dean Joseph Kitagawa, here at the Divinity School in the first half of the 1970s. Marty and I had gotten used to Dean Kitagawa, a Japanese Episcopalian, appealing to a Baptist president of this university to explain and justify virtually every major and minor policy move he made and wanted to make here at the Divinity School. Fair? Not just any Baptist president of this university. And at the beginning there were three in a row. But the defining and first president of the university, William Rainey Harper. For Dean Kitagawa, President Harper had solved the institutional enigma. How could a single institution be faithful at once to three different and distinct kinds of religious education? Or better, three different and distinct kinds of education related to the phenomenon of religion and the phenomena of religions. How could such an educational institution be faithful to its longer history of preparing leaders for the ministry of particular groups or denominations, whether in the parish or on the foreign mission field or in society and culture, while at the same time honoring, carrying out, and advancing what is essential to the very essence and credibility of university education and research? That is, the rigorous and most studiously objective analysis of religion and religions. And still, at the same time, incorporating and advancing the intellectual work of defending and creatively formulating normative claims to religious truth in both religious and public spheres. How could these three types of training, researching, and educating coexist in one institution, under one roof, with one faculty, one student body? It was an enigma. But an enigma that was, in Kitagawa's assessment, cracked open by President Harper in his claim that instead of these three types of education and research modes being in conflict, they were, in fact, essential ingredients to the fullest expression and highest quality of each. That is, to absent any one of them, of the three, the preparation of religious leaders for religious communities, the academic study of religion and religions, and the advancement of normative inquiry in religious spheres, would be to diminish the quality of the other two. Students preparing for ministry would be better ministers if they were exposed and become appreciative of, as the essential components of their education, both the scholarly analysis and critiques of religion and the normative dimensions that emerge from religion and religious communities. Students preparing for careers in research of religious phenomena would be better scholars if they were exposed to and appreciative of both what is involved in religious leadership in communities of faith and how normative faith claims operate in those religious communities and in the wider public and civic spheres. And yes, theologians, philosophers of religion, religious ethicists would be better at their crafts if exposed to and appreciative of the elements of religious leadership and scholarly, non-normative study of religious phenomena. To the best of my memory, Episcopalian and Far Eastern historian of religion Kitagawa never converted to the Baptist version of the Christian faith. But I do want to advance the notion that there was a kind of Baptistification going on here, and largely in a way that Lutheran and Professor Marty proposed the concept when Kitagawa appealed to Harper in order to sustain and advance still a novel kind of way of institutionally bringing three disparate kinds of educational roles together for the sake of enhancing the quality and effectiveness of each. For Marty, if I've understood him correctly, I will get corrected soon, I take it, if I'm wrong, Baptistification has to do with all or most religious communities in the modern period acceding to an individualizing and localizing of religious understanding and behavior in distinction from maintaining religious identity primarily from a widespread, historically coherent, and commonly shared set of beliefs, rituals, practices, and behaviors. Close? Good. These individualizing and localizing expressions are based on a concept of religious freedom and group autonomy that is endemic to what I would claim is authentic Baptist identity. Harper, as a religious leader, as scholar of ancient biblical languages, and as normative thinker and leader, especially in educational philosophy, was true to his Baptist heritage in each of these three spheres. In that respect, I suppose he does not reflect Baptistification, insofar as he was the bearer of a tradition in each of these spheres. But he does represent that concept in the way he exercised his freedom and his creativity as religious, scholarly, and normative leader, and brought the three together in a divinity school with its integrative and interactive character, and that was an integral part of the university, as was not the case in other university-related divinity schools, theological schools, or departments of religion. Kitagawa, in turn, does not represent that Baptistification insofar as he was devoted to and led the divinity school according to the Harper design with a kind of rigidity. Everything had to fit that normative mode. But he did introduce a major innovation when he secured approval of a curricular change in which the school-wide MA degree was foundational to the ministry program, the dialogical fields of academic study, and to the fields of theology and ethics. Common base to all three. And he clearly did so when he created the Institute for the Advanced Study of Religion, later named the Marty Center. In that respect, he too was engaged in Baptistification. That's a hard word to pronounce. But that characterization, I would argue, would be more aptly applied to Dean Shaler Matthews, with his fostering of a new Chicago School of Theology that incorporated the academic and university disciplines of the social sciences and the philosophical reformulations of John Dewey and George Herbert Mead, and that had, with Harper's blessing, an outreach program of publications and programs for clergy and laity across the country, which was the democratizing of scholarship on religion and advocating for a modernist theological stance, a normative stance. It's an apt characterization of Baptist Dean Bernard Loomer in his creating a second phase of that Chicago School of Theology that was much less associated with the social scientific disciplines of the university and much more philosophically oriented, primarily in process philosophical orientation and his part of the Federated Theological Faculties with Meadville Lombard Theological School, Chicago Theological Seminary, and Disciples Divinity House. And the Baptistification certainly applies to Lutheran Dean Gerald Brower in his introduction of the Doctor of Ministry program to the Divinity School and all the definitive features included within it, including its name, a doctor of ministry, and the way it was proceeded as an educational process. In short, there's been over the decades different ways in which the Divinity School has resisted baptistification by honoring the basic but innovative configuration of its initial Baptist University president. But the school has also exhibited that characterization by reconfiguring Harper's original configuration. Now, I've not covered the deans subsequent to Kitagawa, that is Gamwell, Gilpin, Rosengarten, and Mitchell. But I am confident that they have maintained that tension between honoring a Harper heritage and exercising the freedom to introduce significant innovations represented by Harper, the Baptistification founding president of the university, which is now celebrating 125 years of educational and scholarly leadership. But we do an injustice to the longer history of the Divinity School if we confine our attention only to the 125th anniversary of this University of Chicago. As we know, the Divinity School is a predecessor to the university by 25 years, the first part of which were in relationship with, but separate from, a first and rocky, unstable, and ultimately failed University of Chicago, then separated from that failed experiment and finally rejoined when the new university was conceived and later given birth. Actually, we might date this year the 155th anniversary of the school if the planting of the seed or the conception of the school is seen as the starting point. For it was in 1860 that a small group of Baptists discussed and then formed what they called the Theological Society of the Northwest. And 3 years later secured a state charter for the Baptist Theological Union at Chicago, which had as its mission, quote, the founding, endowment, support, and direction of an institution for theological instruction, which was subsequently named the Baptist Union Theological Seminary. There is, if truth be told, and if time would allow, a lot to unpack in that first decade of the school, starting with the conception in 1860 and concluding with the entry into its first building close to the university on 34th and Rhodes in the fall of 1869. The seminary prior to that had rented space from the university. As Daniel will probably describe, the archives of those early years exhibit the seminary's own version of baptistification. There was, for example, the expressed desire not to be dependent on Baptist seminaries in the eastern part of the nation for their religious leadership. On Newton Theological Institution in Massachusetts, the Hamilton Theological and Literary Institute in rural New York, later Colgate Theological Seminary, and the urban Rochester Theological Seminary, even though it drew heavily on exactly those seminaries for the faculty of the new school in Chicago. It wasn't simply a decision of pride in growing your own to establish the Baptist Union Theological Seminary. It was, more importantly, a conviction that ministers and other religious leaders of this part of the Midwest, then called the Northwest, needed to be trained for ministry in the milieu of this frontier outpost, in the context of the migrant communities that needed to be served, in the environment of the post-Civil War industrialism that was emerging and for which Chicago was already beginning to be a center. I want to contend that all of this was an early expression of baptistification that was characteristic of the seminary. It was not a copy of those Eastern schools, but self-consciously something new, freely and autonomously self-determining in response to its distinctive environment. At the same time, it was a union seminary in the sense that of trying to serve churches from a broad area of what is now the Midwest and then the Northwest. That is Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and so on. And it was attentive, too, to the needs of immigrants in the formation. Forming, for example, a Scandinavian department within the school, and then to particular national expressions within that Scandinavian department. The seminary, like the university to which it was related, faced major financial hurdles provoked by the economic panics and the two Chicago fires in 1871 and 1874, the latter being more devastating than the first. These events resulted in supporters not being able to keep their pledges of financial support to the school, as they were forced to rebuild their own financial security from the ashes. Still, the seminary was significantly more successful in achieving stronger financial stability than the university of which it had been related. And that only increased with the seminary's move to Morgan Park, and as it secured periodic help from no less than Baptist John D. Rockefeller and other wealthy benefactors. The move to Morgan Park, in fact, further endangered the university financially, because the Baptist constituency had greater loyalty and commitment to the Baptist seminary than it did to the Baptist university it had formed. That made it possible for it to continue its curricular innovations in ways that were not possible for the university. The Baptist Union Theological Seminary, commonly known as the Morgan Park Baptist Seminary, after its move to the new location, had its own William Rainey Harper as its president, in the person of George Washington Northrop, a graduate of and then a professor of church history at Rochester Theological Seminary. When he accepted the faculty appointment in Chicago, Northrop changed fields of instruction and expertise from ecclesiastical history to systematic theology. And in that chosen field, he proved to be an innovator himself. Soon he was elected president of the new seminary, and he remained in that post until the school was incorporated into the new University of Chicago as the condition of financial support of Rockefeller's financial support for the new university and Rockefeller's insistence upon the selection of the first president. President Northrop joined the faculty of the Divinity School in systematic theology, then without any administrative duties. I want to liken Northrop to Harper in their presidential leadership, keeping in mind that Harper was briefly a student of Northrop, and that Northrop had hired Harper as a faculty member in biblical studies before Harper departed for his faculty assignments, 3 at one time, by the way, at Yale. Northrop, in his own thinking, revealed the Baptistification principle, moving from a fairly traditional Calvinist stance to one closely identified with what is called the New Theology, that drew on religious experience, historical and critical methods of biblical studies, and a distancing from traditional formulations of doctrine to one informed by contemporary thought in numerous fields. Instead of sin and depravity as the controlling themes of his theology, he developed a concept of God's ethical perfection that was available to human beings in creation, moral government, and salvation, and that resulted in the brotherhood of all human beings. But the principle was evident as well in his presidential leadership, in faculty appointments, and in curricular formation. In Northrop's shared Baptistification principle with Harper, there could be a fairly smooth transition from an independent Baptist seminary becoming a full academic and professional unit of the new university. So today I'm asking that we give due respect and honor to George Washington Northrop without in any way diminishing the immense contribution of William Rainey Harper. I have suggested in the title of this presentation, The Breaking of the Baptist Enigma at the University of Chicago and its Divinity School, that there is an enigma at stake here, but one that can be broken. What is that enigma? It's the question of why a religious tradition that resists, indeed rejects, creeds and creedal formulations that apply to all its adherents as a means of affirming and defining the essential truths of the Christian faith, and that can serve, therefore, as a hermeneutical instrument for comprehending Scriptures and following the teachings of those Scriptures and other sources of divine revelation. A religious tradition that affirms the centrality of Scripture as a, if not the source of truth, as a guide to thought, religious practice, and behavior, and that holds that these Scriptures are self-evidently clear and comprehensible to all human beings of sound mind, and contend that all of its adherents are capable and yes required to be engaged in ministry to one another and the world without hierarchical status. Why does such a religious tradition then invest itself, sponsor, and support institutions of professional ministerial training, the academic study of religion, and of the normative theological and philosophical and ethical inquiry. Why that is, according to the principle of baptistification, that affirms the freedom of the individual and the autonomy of the local congregation, why does it seek and embrace and hold to the truths we live by? Why would such a people then create schools of inquiry and learning and formation? It seems like an enigma. My answer to those questions is that without required beliefs defined by creeds or their equivalents, individuals and groups are free, not required, to know as much about divine reality as they possibly can, and be guided in their thought and behavior according to what they learn and grasp and live by. A university and its divinity school that combines preparation for ministry, inquiry into and understanding of religion as a human phenomenon, and religions as sources of wisdom and ethical action, and an unimpeded search for normative truths, be they theological, philosophical, or ethical, is an institution that is a wondrous gift to people of faith and unfaith. All human beings and members of the faith communities are free to refrain from the use of this wondrous gift, free to embrace creeds, abide by the required behaviors. Baptists, that is, are free to choose themselves individually and together a less free understanding of religious faith. But for Baptists who wish to retain their full freedom of belief and conscience and the autonomy of assembly of like-minded persons, an institution like the University of Chicago and its Divinity School is important, indeed essential. It is an instrument of baptistification, and Baptists encourage others to make full use of it. Thank you.
Dear colleagues and friends, we historians probably too often quote Lord Acton with a little flip that power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. And today is one day when I wish I had it because I actually have a visual aid. My title is called Discovery is Our Business, and I want to stress the word that Professor Greenfield used, the integral relation of the university and the divinity school. How they're integrated and integral. Charles Huggins, one of the great scientists here, Nobelists and so on, had on his wall a Chinese saying, which his daughter, Emily Fine of the visiting committee, gave. I spoke at his memorial, and she flew in from San Francisco and brought me this wonderful thing. Come and visit me in the John Hancock, and we'll adore it together. It says, to make discovery is man's calling, or Huggins put it succinctly in his laboratory, discovery is our business. Because I think as I was listening to Larry Greenfield, the thing that this place wanted always to do was to have a new investment in the meanings of religious history, in my case, biblical literature, the world religions, etc. How does it all come about? My approach to this is to talk about the genius of the University of Chicago and its Divinity School. I looked up genius in the Oxford English Dictionary. In use, we're using it here. The prevalent feeling, opinions, innateness, taste, and it comes from the Middle English term in Latin, the attendant spirit present from one's birth, innate ability or character from the roots of the word generally, to beget. So how we were begotten and what is innate and what is prevalent. The prevalent character or spirit of something as a nation, an institution, a characteristic. And for me, it is that concept of discovery. In whatever year, we'll let him handle the dates today, the Carnegie Report issued one of these statements, which every few years you get, crisis. I've never not lived in a crisis. Crisis in the humanities, crisis in divinity, crisis in whatever. And all the university were to respond to it, and Chicago did it in its style. President Levy appointed a committee of 11 people, and they were sages. They really were. I was chair, and all I had to do was listen to them, but I really enjoyed it. Richard McKeon from philosophy, Jacob Getzels from education, Dr. Tarnoff, head of the med school, 11 of us, and we got to sit together and just visit about what was the point of the university. And it was Jacob Getzels who says you should always look for the genius of any institution of which you're a part. Ball State University is empowered by the state of Indiana to prepare wonderful teachers. It can do all other kinds of things, but it dare never forget its fundamental mission. And I think as you take both the Baptist Theological Union, the BUST, and the University Divinity School, sharing in the university's own larger function, that was the pursuit. What is our genius? You can apply it to almost anything that we're about, because as a university you're trying to incorporate an awful lot of things. We didn't want to be narrowed in any way at all. I cherish somewhere, maybe it's in the archives, a clipping from the old Chicago Sun-Times roto section. That's a prehistoric invention, roto-groover section. In response to this, and we're all supposed to be very practical. And the caption is, Mr. Levy, you mean you'd spend $50,000 on a goddamn marigold while people are dying of cancer? Levy's answer, well, yes. That's the whole article title. But it comes close to it. Whoever got that grant, $50,000 that would be, a lot bigger today, to study marigolds, they didn't ask exactly where it's going to go. I wouldn't be surprised by what it had something to do with later on with cancer research, but that wasn't the pressure on him. The pressure was to discover something about the marigold, just as there was in passion in the med school, Dr. Tarkoff and others. But he said raising funds for a university like this is difficult. If you have a school whose genius is IIT, RIT, a technological institution, or anything that deals with the late stages of discovery, that's not a big deal. He said in the language, gendered language of that day, it's easy to get money for cancer research if you're in the late stages near a cure. But the wives of congressmen, we changed that title today, don't get biomedical research, they get cancer. So if you can be showing how you're closing in on cancer, that's it. We're dealing way back at the beginnings of it all. That's a very different kind of thing happening. The Divinity School, and I think you had it well described by Larry Greenfield here today, was born to have this other kind of approach. Baptist, yes, in its prime years of the 10s and 20s theologically, and the founding in the 1890s, modernist, which meant that they took that tradition and thought you could apply it in fresh, new ways, not afraid of science, not afraid of discovery. That was what they're to be about. What does that mean practically? I can only say that every experience I had around here, I filtered through this kind of vision, was the confirmation of it. I was often on university-wide committees, and I remember one time at the end of summer, we gathered for our first meeting, and spouses were invited, and we're in the Quad Club, and across from me was a scientist. At that time, he was known as the man who had first seen the atom. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's how you do it in the newspapers. And I'm sitting across from him, and I'm all ready for being overwhelmed by scientific discourse. And somebody said to him, well, how did your string quartet coming along? What do you mean? Well, that summer, I think he resolved to read Winston Churchill complete and to complete a string quartet. a scientist. It's not supposed to do that at all. It violated all the terms. But it was his mode of coming to fresh kinds of discovery, as he did then in his own field. To do that, you had to set up an issue, a problematic. At one time, under one of you deans, the ministry program, everybody had a problematic and a theological beginning. I was sitting in an exam one day with, I might as well use her name, Nina Herman Donnelly, married to the Donnelly family and was a passion to be a Presbyterian minister, sorry Baptist, along the way. And all of her concern was to find a way to bring these two together. She did it by reporting on her field work in the Divinity School. She was assigned to be a chaplain at Children's Memorial Hospital. And she discovered that there was very little concern for the parents of the suffering children, or worse yet, after their death. And so she volunteered. One of the women was involved, one of the mothers, I still know, that she would move in with them if they wanted for the year after the child's death, to help them cope, to help them overcome along the way. That was her way to do it. Well, I'll never forget the exam. It was the Monday after Christmas vacation, and Norman Perrin was there to grind her on the New Testament. Picture the terror of that. After Thanksgiving weekend, he's back, and I had Bernard Brown, I think, did I see him come in? He was there, so he could testify, and Joseph Sittler, the theologian. And somebody in the room asked, well, you didn't have a problematic, you have a narrative. Your whole dissertation is a narrative. I said, well, that's just how I do things. Where's the theology? Well, I went to Fourth Presbyterian Church. I heard Pastor Elam Davies preach about Bart and Tillich and St. Paul and all these others. So I was ready to go with that. And Norman Perrin came in and said, without the problematic and the theological section, I was very prejudiced against you, Miss Herman. Coming back from the vacation late at night, having been well fed, etc. I had this thing, and I started reading it. I was going to make fun of it. Instead, I started crying. And I called Nancy, and she was high in Divinity School ranks, his wife, and we read it together till 4 this morning. What had happened? She had discovered through a narrative mode to find a way to get that story. It was just as sophisticated as if she'd had a problematic or a theological thing. It was all both of them along the way. That was the mission along the way in almost every dissertation I can remember. I like to strike terror into the hearts of the people that I was examining. But it was therapeutic, because all I asked was, not what is your topic, they print that, but finish this sentence. The thesis of my thesis is that. That's hard to do. But if you can do that, all the rest follows and flows together. If you don't have it, you never find it along the way. Today, my thesis of my thesis is that it's very important to know the genius of this place, and the genius of this, as decided by our little committee way back when. I can still hear Professor Getzells and McKeon talking about it. The University of Chicago is not interested in approaching a problem when it's almost solved. It believes in ascertaining an area of need, summoning all you can from history and the disciplines, addressing it. He didn't even say that you had to finish solving the problem along the way. One year, I don't know quite how it happened, the Emory University Law School, John Whitty and company, his regular here, invited Don Browning and me to come down because they had a grant for 19 faculty to have a full year sabbatical to deal with the problem of a child. Could be anxiety, could be race, it could be abuse, or whatever. We'd get on the plane Sunday night, we'd go to Atlanta, and we'd meet, each of us with one of the 19 for 3 hours. In the afternoon, they're all together. 19 different disciplines. Oh, was that exciting along the way. Really something. When it was all done, John Whitty said, "Now, Marty, what's your problem with the child?" Oh, we had multiple children, and I'm resolved never to write about them. They had their own dignity. I said, I don't really have a problem. You must not have read your contract. You all deal with a problem. Well, I thought, divinity school, the genius of that place and this place, a problem, and have to find something along the way. My problem was that I hadn't concentrated on a problem, so I used Gabriel Marcel, the great French Catholic existentialist, who makes a distinction between a problem and a mystery. Problems have at least potential solutions. Marcel says, if you have a problem, you lay siege to it. Marshal everything along the way. A mystery, the longer you go to it, the deeper it gets. One of my books is The Mystery of the Child, because I simply learn more about the child by dealing with their sense of wonder and all the other things that went with it along the way. And of course, I found enough scholars who dealt with it. The great burden for the other 18 people was that are you going to train spoiled brats if you're stressing their wonder and all that? Well, I found a scholar in Scotland, Margaret Davidson, who said, no, you know things the kids don't know. And you have to discipline them. They need discipline. She said, what you have to do is be sure every time you're imparting something to them, you're making the next impartation lighter. And every time you discipline, make sure that it's easier the next round. Watch a parent with a child in a supermarket where the kid grabs a candy bar and the mother beats him on the head and everything like that. She's disciplining him. And when she gets home, she has to make it worse, and next week it'll be worse yet. But if you treat them as a mystery, that's it. And I think that's the approach to knowledge that helped me so much. The integration of the two in the university. And they point in a lot of ways. I think when I was a student here, I wasn't that aware of it, but my advisor, Sidney Mead, said, everyone I work with, at least one of the 3 advisors has to be from outside divinity school, which is pretty well the way things still are. I looked in this book. This book is called The Teaching Faculty. It makes no sense without the words and also. Divinity and anthropology, divinity and biological sciences, divinity and education. Or even within a divinity school, you can't do just one thing. The late Tony Yu, whom we're mourning, I think was on 7 faculties along the way. Near Eastern, Far Eastern, Eastern, Early Chinese, Early Chinese, translation, I don't care what it was. He was in all of them. I was only on 3 of them. But I learned a great deal from it. And anybody on the faculty would say the same thing. What we learn from dealing with the problem in education that we wouldn't have confronted otherwise was the great boon of being a part of the university. And it's been reciprocal. I always found great respect from the rest of the university, not in the abstract sense. You read all these articles about secularization is set in and you can't even bring up the subject of the university. It's how you do it. How you do it. And I think that the university got quite open to that, and every faculty member and every alum can point to people who did it that way. So what do you do with it? You integrate the two. You pay attention to your begetting, the word. We just had a good deal about the begetting, which gives us the background to it. It helps you with priorities. William Rainey Harvey was very nervous that if he was going to have something like seminary courses at a divinity school of a university, people would think you're going to be sentimental and soft. To quote William Rainey Harper, make it hard. Boy, did they follow through. And I think the mode of communication was not only argument, but conversation. I am deeply influenced by David Tracy's over here, who taught me a lot about conversation. You wish a little bit of it would go on in Washington. People listening to each other, learning what you didn't know, by the way they're phrasing it, and so on. So Harper wanted a scientific study of religion. Scientific meant something a little different then than it does now, but I think you get what he's after. You would take these texts and study them in the light of what was emergent about the knowledge of human nature. Secondly, providing leadership, he said you provide leadership for who's around you, which at that time was mainly Protestant Christian, later Christian in general, later Christian and Jews, and today we're all over the place. You're providing leadership in an attempt to criticize and interpret a tradition behind the leadership. That's the second. And the third one, practical. When I joined the faculty, I was very naive. I'd been a student. I'd been a pastor for 7 years. I'm sitting there, and Gerald Bauer got Newsweek or Time in there to talk about the wonders of this faculty, and I didn't know anything about it at all. But I said, I was quoted in Time magazine with it. I like to come to this university because the words pragmatic and practical were never disdained. And that's because of what they did with it, through the reflection of interpretation and of leadership along the way. This webbing and integration is at all levels. Who's the president of the Divinity School? His name is Zimmer. You better find out.
Oh, him, yes.
We want our dean to grow our president.
Yeah, thank you. I'll write that down.
Okay. It's been worthwhile for me already. Secondly, a Senate. Every faculty person on tenure track, etc., is in the Senate. It meets, when I was here, it met from 3:40 until 10 after 5, once a month. Never, people were outdoors banging on the doors about student protest or something. At 10 after 5, you had to get out of there, and we got it all done that way. And I think the Divinity has pretty well been run that way too most of the time. The Baptist Theological Union and funding. I see some of the people here who represent the funding that goes along the way. It's integrated in it. You're not aware of what comes from where along there. The proximity of the buildings. Many of the schools that were in our relation to university are at some distance from the rest of it. Here we're about nestled as close as you can be and acquire the parking problems that go with it. Faculty and the neighbor schools, theological schools of the seminaries here, many of their students become a part of it, and we become a part of theirs along the way. The library is thoroughly integrated. The archives, we all get buried together over there. I hope we'll hear about that. I was once chair of the Honorary Degrees Committee of the university, and that's confidential. I can't go into detail. Anybody can nominate anybody. You can nominate yourself, and we'd always scout who nominated themselves. But what I do think I can reveal is that among the top 7 or 10 from whom we had to pick one, there were always 3 or 4 divines. You could probably picture some of the prominent names that came up, but they scouted out others along the way too. And then finally, therefore, we had to be Catholic. Kata holos, concerning the whole. I like his word integral, and that's the big part of it. We had Jakob Weintraub, the Dean of Humanities, speak once to the Divinity faculty on any topic of his choice. And this was during that half year when God was dead and radical theology was over. And Weintraub said, we want the Divinity School to talk about God and the things of God. That's what you're here for. You can interpret that thousands of different ways, but he didn't want it to be different about what it was about along the way. Arthur Cohen, my publisher at Meridian, invented that line of books, wrote a book on Jewish theology, and he said, yeah, you could talk about all kinds of stuff, but sooner or later you have to talk about God. And in a way, theos was part of it, in connection with the sciences and the letters. Happy anniversaries to the Baptistified and the Universitized friends who are here. Thank you.
afternoon, and I can only echo Marty in saying happy anniversaries. What I'm going to do today is give a series of vignettes, and one of those vignettes is about anniversary, one is about arbor, and one is about artifact. And obviously my perspective here is somewhat different from the first two speakers. I'm the university archivist, and in a sense I'm buried in the record. When I began my studies as an historian, I first learned that we must always be skeptical of human memory and always test it against the record. And the more that I've worked in the archives, the more I've come to understand that we must always be skeptical of the record and test it against human memory. And I think we're very fortunate today to have two speakers before me who represent both the memory and the record, because they've lived it, both of them. So our topic this afternoon is anniversary, the anniversaries of the university and the Divinity School, and the history of those intertwined institutions. Anniversaries, as we know, come as welcome occasions for celebration and reflection. They can be opportunities to gather and reflect and reconsider, but they can also pose questions of the appropriate date and the proper purpose and what exactly is being commemorated and when it should be commemorated. The university's 125th anniversary is no exception to this rule. When it was first announced that the university was going to be celebrating this year, 2015, the 125th anniversary of the institution, the question of earlier celebrations arose. How had this anniversary been celebrated previously? What were the precedents for ceremony and commemoration? And when asked, I had to answer quite frankly that the anniversary had never been celebrated before at any time in the university's history, and that this was in fact the first time any formal programs would be scheduled to mark a legal incorporation in 1890. In point of fact, as many of you know, the University of Chicago is fortunate to have 3 birthdays, and these were first noted, as far as I can tell, by Martin Ryerson, the president of the Board of Trustees, as early as the university's quinquennial celebration in 1896. With John D. Rockefeller sitting on the platform just feet away from him, he told his audience, "The charter of the university bears the date September 10th, 1890. Its academic existence began in 1891 with the appointment of the first members of the faculty. Its doors were opened to students first in the autumn of 1892. This is not an imposing chronological table," Chairman Ryerson said. "It does not appear to us through any charm of age or long association. Any interest which it may inspire must be derived from something other than long retrospect." Yet Ryerson spoke in 1896, 5 years after the appointment of the first faculty members in 1891, and it was apparent from the timing of this celebration that he and the other founders clearly preferred to commemorate 1891 rather than 1890 or 1892. And indeed, the tradition soon was established at this university to celebrate in cycle with 1891 and not 1890 or 92. The decennial or 10th anniversary took place in 1901-02, the 25th anniversary in 1916, the 50th anniversary in 1941, if you're keeping count here, the 75th anniversary in 1965-66, and the centennial spanned the academic year 1991-92. From the day's point of view, with the longer retrospect that Martin Ryerson spoke of, it's possible to see why 1891 may have had greater appeal. It celebrated, first of all, the ideal of the university as a congregation of faculty members, researching, teaching, publishing scholars and scientists, and emphasized the essential truth that the university is the faculty, and the faculty is the university. It also paid tribute to William Rainey Harper, who's already been mentioned a couple of times this afternoon, who took office on July 1st, 1891, and became at once on that date both the university's first president and university's first faculty member as head professor of the Department of Semitic Languages and Literatures. But 1891 had appeal as well because it was a forward-looking date, prospectively anticipating the advances to be achieved by the faculty led by President Harper. 1890, by contrast, had other connotations, more retrospective, the date of a founding, to be sure, but a founding still resonant with the failure of the earlier or old University of Chicago. As Larry has mentioned, this first University of Chicago had been chartered in 1857 by the Baptists of Chicago. It struggled for 3 decades, unable to secure sufficient financial sources of support. It weathered the Chicago fire. It weathered a series of financial panics, but it was finally undone by financial mismanagement by members of its own board, and it collapsed, bankrupt, in a round of finger-pointing, and closed its doors in 1886. The demise of the old university, occurring in such a raw and public fashion, left the Baptist community of Chicago embarrassed and shaken. And it was within these circumstances that this new extraordinary effort was launched by Baptist leaders within just the next 4 years to organize a new denominational agency to promote education, to attract the interest and support of John D. Rockefeller, to recruit William Rainey Harper, to raise matching funds from the Chicago community, and to reincorporate a new University of Chicago in 1890. Thus the date 1890, and thus I would also argue some ambivalence on the part of the founders in placing too much emphasis on the memories it summed up. For the Baptists of Chicago, it had not begun this way at all. 40 years earlier, Chicago in the 1850s was a rapidly growing western city, thus all the mentions of the Northwestern Baptists. The Protestant community was also growing. In these years, Harvey Arnold has written, the Baptists were the most numerous denomination in Chicago, the Congregationalists and the Presbyterians and the Methodists all following. But the overall institutional presence of the Protestants, especially in a city whose population was rising very quickly, shooting up from 100,000 to over 200,000 in population, was really not all that substantial. And in large part because of this, there was a great interest in founding new denominational education institutions. And this happened particularly in the 1850s. In 1851, the Methodists founded Northwestern University, which I think still thrives. In 1857, the Presbyterians founded Lake Forest University, no longer a university, but still thriving today as a liberal arts college. And at the same time, Chicago's Baptists were also seeking their foothold on the academic frontier. Senator Stephen A. Douglas, whose wife, as it happened, was a Baptist, was a prominent Chicago landowner and speculator. And he wanted to attract a college, to a tract of land he hoped to develop as a suburban community several miles south of Chicago, near 35th and the Lakeshore. He had first offered the land to the Presbyterians of Chicago, but they declined. It's thought perhaps because of his association with the management of a plantation in Mississippi, which was the source of much of his wealth. But the Baptists acted quickly to accept his offer, founding the first University of Chicago on the site that he had made available, and naming Douglas the chairman of the Board of Trustees of the new institution. As Larry has recounted, the Chicago Baptists also undertook, just a few years later, to create a second institution. The Baptist Theological Union was formed. It received its formal charter from the state of Illinois, and in 1865-66 it began offering its first instruction inside the building of the old University of Chicago. In September 1866, George Washington Northrop was elected its president, and in October 1867, the seminary formally opened and eventually had a building directly across the street from the old university. The Baptist seminary was never large or prosperous, but it escaped the administrative disjunctures and financial missteps that plagued its sister institution, the old University of Chicago. In 1877, the seminary accepted an offer from one of its most important supporters, another land developer, George C. Walker, to move to the south suburb of Morgan Park. And there it was installed in new quarters on a 50-acre suburban campus, and it left behind on the south side in the city its one-time neighbor, the University of Chicago. When the university began to fail in the 1870s and 80s and then collapsed, it was the comparatively more stable and secure Baptist Union Theological Seminary that offered the best prospects for a revival of the Baptist hopes for education in Chicago. And the circle of leaders at the seminary, as a result, became the core group for all the forthcoming discussions of that new university. George Washington Northrop, who's already been mentioned, E. Nelson Blake, Thomas W. Goodspeed, Ari Holbert, Galusha Anderson, and a new professor of Hebrew at the seminary, William Rainey Harper, who later accepted joint appointments at Yale, but kept in close touch with his Chicago colleagues. The Baptist Union Theological Seminary was thus, for a critical period of several years, the center around which all hopes of the Chicago academic project revolved. It was Baptists associated with the seminary who took the lead in campaigning for the idea of a new university within the Baptist community. It was the Chicago Baptists from the seminary who cultivated John D. Rockefeller and William Rainey Harper and eventually brought their parallel interests together. And it was these same Baptists associated with the seminary who argued successfully that the new university should be in the city of Chicago, the site of the first failed institution, for only then could the denomination of disappointment of that first effort be diminished and outshone by the anticipated success of a new endeavor. Thomas W. Goodspeed, the Baptist parish minister turned Baptist Union Theological Seminary administrator, who was intimately involved in all of these discussions and negotiations, and who I think probably deserves to share the title founder of the university as much, if not more, than anyone else, put it succinctly. He wrote, "The entire history of the seminary emphasized the conviction of the importance of Chicago as an educational center. The men having its interests in charge realized more profoundly than anyone else could do the greatness of the loss of the old university. To them it was a thing not to be thought of that there should not exist a college or university in immediate proximity to the theological seminary. They gave themselves, therefore, to the founding of a new university with a determination that no one else could feel. This interest and purpose were controlling factors in forwarding the movement for the new institution, and a great constituency ready to follow where they led was behind the seminary and its friends." The quickening effort to found the new university also propelled the idea that the seminary should become an integral part of the new university. Earlier discussions of citing the seminary organizationally within the old university had foundered, an outcome that turned out in the end to be in the best interest of the seminary's survival. But with the incorporation of the new university in September 1890 and the election of William Rainey Harper as its president immediately following, renewed attention was now given to a proposal to merge the seminary with the university. At its meeting of September 16, 1890, only 6 days after the university's incorporation, the Board of Trustees met and took the decisive action that would transform the old seminary and bring it under new auspices within the bounds of the university. The proposal for this transformation was made in the form of a carefully crafted letter from John D. Rockefeller to the university trustees, reflecting months of careful discussions and negotiations among the founders. Rockefeller offered to make an additional gift of $1 million, and he'd already made a $600,000 matching gift to the university, but he was now offering an additional $1 million towards the new university. Of this amount, $800,000 was to be for endowment for graduate studies at the university, but explicitly, he said, not for land, not for buildings, not for repair. $100,000 was to form an endowment for a new divinity school at the University of Chicago. And again, none of it was to be spent on land or buildings or repairs. And only the final $100,000, only this portion, was to be used for the construction of buildings for the divinity school. All of this Rockefeller offered on condition, and the condition was that the Baptist Union Theological Seminary would become an organic part of the University of Chicago and move to the university's campus within 2 years. Rockefeller's $1 million pledge with its stipulations for the seminary and the divinity school was immediately accepted by the Board of Trustees, and in July 1891, less than 2 weeks after William Rainey Harper took office as president, the boards of the two institutions, the seminary and the university, signed the formal agreement for the merger, which took legal effect in July 1892. So 1890, the date we commemorate this afternoon, in fact marks not only the 125th anniversary of the incorporation of the University of Chicago, but the agreement 6 days later to create a divinity school constructed from the fabric of the Baptist Union Theological Seminary. And we can also celebrate this year the Baptist Theological Union and the life of the seminary it created, which offered its first courses of instruction 150 years ago. The histories of these four institutions, the old university, the seminary, the new university, the divinity school, are intertwined and interdependent. But antedating the current university by 25 years, the seminary can rightly be seen as the core around which the idea of a university in Chicago was sustained at a critical juncture, and then, with the support of John D. Rockefeller and the citizens of Chicago, successfully refashioned. The agreement for the formation of the new Divinity School in 1890 stipulated that it must be housed in its new quarters on the university campus within 2 years, that is, by the fall of 1892. The tract of land for the new university in Hyde Park, fronting on the Midway Plaisance between Washington Park and Jackson Park, was thought by the trustees to be advantageously located in an expanding part of the city. But it was hardly appealing in its original state. The land was low-lying, with many shallow swales and flats that filled with standing water or turned to mud whenever it rained. Planks had to be put out across the grounds to avoid losing any of the faculty and students who stepped aside. And only one feature broke the line of this undistinguished landscape. It was a stand of trees that began in front of what is now Levy Hall, near the flagpole, and it ran south in a band about 50 feet wide to a point just in front of what is now Wiebold Hall. My geology professor once reminded a class of mine to remember that in a glaciated landscape, differences in elevation can be very subtle. And the differences here may have been quite subtle, in the inches or fractions of inches, but they had made enough difference along this barely discernible range that trees of 15 or 20 feet in height had grown with trunks a few inches across. They'd been able to take root and sustain themselves in a small grove or arbor out on the prairie. This grove is clearly visible in many early photographs of the campus. In fact, I think in one of the photographs that's in the cycling set of slides with us this afternoon. It was also one of the most readily identifiable landmarks for visitors to the Columbian Exposition as they gazed out of the teetering cars of the Ferris wheel at the new campus. Early students found in the hot weather that these trees offered some of the little shelter available on the sun-baked campus. And this swath of trees, this grove, this arbor, was also to become the location of the Divinity School's new campus. In 1892, the first of the Divinity buildings went up, 2 residence halls for men, and the students, of course, were all men then, known as Middle and South Divinity Halls, now known as Goodspeed Hall and Gates Hall, fronting on this group of prairie trees. And to the north along Ellis Avenue, Cobb Hall became the first academic home of the Divinity School faculty and students. In 1896, another building opened, Haskell Oriental Museum. It housed Divinity School lecture halls and other academic functions. It also housed the Divinity Library with all of the books that had been brought from the seminary, and others added with strong faculty involvement. There was also in this building an historical and archaeological museum, the forerunner of the Oriental Institute, and the office of the president of the university, which occupied a portion of the first floor. This building, like the Divinity residence halls, fronted on the prairie grove of trees just to its west, but that grove was now steadily diminishing as more and more trees were cut down. The university had hired landscapers, grass was being planted, and so perhaps by this point only about 40 or 50 of those prairie trees still remained. By the early 20th century, the grove had shrunk to, as far as I can tell, about 15 trees, and they were soon replaced with the hardier and larger varieties that now make this quadrangle south of us such a pleasant retreat. The later additions that provided the Divinity School with its own buildings were planned to occupy adjacent locations as part of this ensemble and within the site of the original Prairie Grove. Swift Hall, which opened in 1926, 30 years after the Haskell Oriental Museum, Bond Chapel, and its cloister, which were completed the same year. Another distinction of these buildings, and especially in common with the pattern across the new university, was the nature of the donors who made them possible. John D. Rockefeller, as we know, provided the funds for the Middle and South Divinity Halls, Gates, and Goodspeed today as part of his $1 million pledge, which, as he stipulated, was otherwise not to be used for any campus construction. But Haskell Oriental Museum, Swift Hall, and Bond Chapel were all the gifts of women donors: Caroline Aldrich Haskell, Anne Higgins Swift, and Mary Adelia Bond. I've argued in a couple of other talks I've given recently that the key role of women in founding the University of Chicago is too little recognized. The Articles of Incorporation in September 1890 stipulated that the university would provide, impart, and furnish opportunities for all departments of higher education to persons of both sexes on equal terms. This provision assured that the university would be coeducational, and it laid the groundwork for successfully attracting a rapidly growing student body composed of both women and men. It also served to attract important women donors who gave the critically needed funds for creating the physical campus, a role John D. Rockefeller insisted should not be taken on by him, but by the university's other friends and supporters, especially those in Chicago, the city whose name the university bore. So women donors were extraordinarily generous in meeting Rockefeller's challenge in building the physical infrastructure of the campus. Women donors funded all of the undergraduate residences for both men and women on the early campus. They funded all of the science laboratories in the early university. They provided the funds to erect buildings for men's student activities, for the laboratory school, the classics departments, two of the first hospitals for the medical center. And women donors also gave the buildings that would house the heart of the Divinity School's work. In its donors for its physical home, as in so many other ways, the Divinity School was an integral part of the new educational experiment in Chicago, the culminating group of buildings, Swift, Bond, and Cloister, still serving their purposes at the center of the campus now 90 years later. I'd like to close with another connection between the Divinity School and the university, and it is an object, or as we say in special collections, an artifact. I'm sometimes asked, what is the oldest item in special collections, or what is the smallest, or what is the most frequently requested by researchers? And there are intriguing answers to all of those questions. But the answer to one question is always obvious. What is the largest item in special collections? There are many important early holdings in the library now in special collections that owe their presence to the Divinity School and its faculty. The Hengstenberg Rare Book Collection, purchased by the Baptist Union Theological Seminary in 1859 and incorporated within the University of Chicago Library in 1892. The Papyrus Collection, acquired by Professor Edgar Goodspeed. The early Byzantine manuscripts of the Gospels and the New Testament, collected by Professors Edward Goodspeed and Harold Willoughby, and recently digitized by the library at the initiative and with the support of Dean and Professor Margaret Mitchell. These and many more evidences of the long scholarly tradition of the Divinity School. But the largest item in our rare book, manuscript, and archival holdings has special associations. It is a large wooden desk, framed entirely of oak, stained dark, 6 feet wide, 3.5 feet deep, 4 feet high, fitted originally with a rolling top that locked. Backing the top surface and inset behind it are what were once 40 individual sorting cubby holes. The front of the desk presents 13 drawers of different dimensions, a sliding compartment with 8 more vertical sorting bins, 2 paths for wells of ink and blotter, and in front of the desk stands a rolling high-backed oak chair, 4 feet high, 2 feet deep, more than 2 feet wide, with massive curving arms and a tall, curved, arched back. This heavy wooden roll-top desk and chair were used by William Rainey Harper as the first president of the University of Chicago from 1892 to 1906. It was initially located in the president's office in Cobb Hall, and at the time the university opened in 1892. It was then moved to Haskell Oriental Museum when that building was completed in 1896, and Harper's presidential office moved to the southeast corner of the first floor in that building. A number of photographs show President Harper seated at this great wooden desk, cubbyholes stuffed full of documents. Some dividers have been removed to make more room for the small notebooks in which Harper recorded every detail of his schedule and plans. And on the writing surface of the desk itself, between the president's stick telephone and the tube of his dictation machine and the bell to summon his faithful secretary, Miss Cobb, stacks of files and papers. The desk is what we today might call an operating system, a centralized mechanism for sorting, processing, managing, and at the user interface sat President Harper himself, prodding, questioning, deflecting, pleading, declining, challenging. At Harper's death in 1906, the desk passed to the second president of the University of Chicago, Harry Pratt Judson, who used it until the Harper Memorial Library opened in 1912. In that building, there was a new, spacious, high-ceilinged presidential suite. New furniture was acquired for the president's use, and the roll-top desk was no longer needed. But the life of the William Rainey Harper desk continued. Shayla Matthews had been named Dean of the Divinity School in 1908, and the desk now passed, most appropriately, to him. In 1894, William Rainey Harper had brought Matthews to Chicago from Colby College as part of his intention to place religious studies on an equal footing with other modern academic disciplines. Matthews became professor of historical and comparative theology and then served as dean from 1908 until his retirement in 1933. For more than 20 years then, Harper's desk was Shaler Matthews' desk. It was a physical symbol of their academic relationship, their shared intellectual ideals, and their common ambitions for a critical approach to religious studies and the independent and pioneering spirit of the Divinity School. Today, the Harper Matthews desk sits in special collections in a visible location in an alcove in our large first-floor classroom. You are all more than welcome to come and view it, and we hope you do. It is a tangible reminder of a still vivid institutional experience and tradition, like this room where we meet today, which once housed the books of the seminary and Divinity Library, like this building so well maintained for more than a century, and this occasion which celebrates shared commemorations, shared histories, and shared commitments. There is indeed great cause to celebrate today. And so, on behalf of the library and all your colleagues there, I want to wish all of you very much a happy anniversary. Thank you.
Well, friends, we have time for questions, comments, etc. To our speakers or just to the group. The floor is open.
Do you recall when the first female divinity school student was?
When was the first
I didn't know Meyer is the first African.
I can talk about it in terms of the Baptist Union Theological Seminary. It had a provision very early in its catalog that said women were welcome to study at the school, but they could not seek ordination. And that was probably in the 1870s. Unusual in the provision of having women enrolled, although not for purposes of ordination.
I owned the first yearbook, and it's full of women. They're in every department. And the dormitories you mentioned are named after some of them, and they're all over the place.
Yes, I'm not sure what the first woman who attended and graduated from the Divinity School may have been. I do know that the coeducational policies of the university created such an enormous interest for women students that, and I'm sure Marty knows about this as well, university officials became quite concerned because the proportion of women students was rising much faster than that of men. And they were quite concerned that if the proportion became too high, men would stop applying to come to the University of Chicago. And the University of Chicago would simply become another of the Seven Sisters. So there were steps taken at just about the time of the 10th anniversary to try to separate. It was called sexual segregation, to separate women and men students in the first 2 years of the college. It failed utterly. It provoked outrage from the Dean of Women, Marion Talbot, and all the alumni of the university. There was a protest, and William Rainey Harper, in the midst of the celebrations of the 10th anniversary, had to take time in his remarks to address this crisis. I'm sure he was not pleased to have to do that. But the sexual segregation quietly faded away and was not heard again. But it did leave behind two buildings, and some of you may remember these buildings. Ellis Hall was one of them, and the other was University on University Avenue here, and was used for many years. Ellis Hall became University Bookstore, and was used as a University Bookstore. That was where the men were supposed to study, and the women were to study over here on University Avenue.
You said this was Cobb Hall named after Mr. Harper's, President Harper's secretary.
No, it wasn't. But the reason I know his secretary's name is that in looking through the records, I came across one Cobb after another, and I thought, how many Cobbs were there in the 1890s in Chicago? The university architect was Henry Ives Cobb, and he designed the first Gothic-style buildings on the campus. Cobb Hall is named for Silas Cobb, who was a university donor. I wish I knew Miss Cobb's first name, but I don't, because all the letters and notes from William Rainey Harper simply say, Miss Cobb, do this, Miss Cobb, do that.
Yes, please.
Can you say anything about the history of the university's work on the problem of poverty in the neighborhood surrounding the area?
The university's role in addressing issues of poverty.
And the neighborhoods.
And the neighborhoods.
From the beginning, the sociology department was supposed to be a part of it. There was a lot of interest in the settlement house movement. It had sprung up independent of Jane Addams and so on, but the university did a great deal in that line. I don't know how involved they were. I don't think ever.
Can I say, Terry, they created the service league, which still exists at that time, in faculty-wise.
I mean, the university does not have a great record on issues of race. The deliberate efforts to exclude close covenants. And it was African American student, close friend of mine, Truman Gibson, lawyer in town, manager of the legal counsel of Joe Lewis and so on, who fought it, and the university resisted vigorously the inclusion of African Americans into the Hyde Park area.
I was once supposed to go to South Africa the year that apartheid was ending, and I remember chatting with Don Brown and saying the council here in Chicago was preparing for it. He said, you'd be very surprised that you'll be at the University of Cape Town and they have very little to do with poverty and blacks and so on. And he said, look out the window. This is how uninvolved we were at that time. And it's very late it came, but through social work and through settlement housing was probably the original.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was. And one of the appeals of the original site here at Hyde Park, which was acquired from the landowner, Marshall Field, was that Hyde Park was thought to be on its way to what was called a suburb of the first class, meaning a suburb for prosperous and upper middle class folk. And of course that's how Hyde Park began, as a railroad suburb. The man of the house commuted on the railroad, and the women and the children stayed home in Hyde Park. And what happened in Hyde Park and in Kenwood too, as is well known, is that the whole nature of the community began to change radically and dramatically. This process began in the 1930s, accelerated in the 1940s, and by the 1950s had reached a point of real crisis. And the university's response, I think everyone knows here, was to participate in the urban renewal program, very controversial. I think one of the only positive things that could be said in its favor is that it was the first of any kind anywhere in the country. There was an opportunity to learn from mistakes made here, and the lessons were unfortunately not learned at all. But the university early on certainly had a strong commitment to social welfare. This was the home, after all, of the School of Social Service Administration, Edith Abbott, Mr. Breckenridge, and their colleagues. And it was also the home of the sociology department with its intense interest in urban sociology. Louis Worth and the faculty, a very strong commitment to racial integration, and the end of racial covenants and bars to housing for African Americans. But I think it's fair to say these were not always the prevailing interests of the institution.
These experiments were always very broad, but always white. Not me, it was very different in that sense. Some of the old holiest of all things said about university was with Rockefeller money. And our particular student body, it was university, used Baptist money to pay atheist professors to teach Catholic philosophy to Jewish students. It was the era when Margaret Atwood was there. They were also worried about the Catholic takeover. Aristotle and Aquinas.
It should be noted that Sheila Matthews and other members of the faculty were Midwest expression of social gospel, and the primary concern is economic justice.
Mary whispered to me a line I forgot in my free to come sort of close to it on this. We were reminiscing about faculty and came across a picture of Joseph Sittler, the theology department some years ago. And he said something I thought was very profound at the time of the student unrest, and some of the students took part in saving the place and changing the place. Sittler said, some students use the university and the other students are the university. And I think that really is the case. You can, I look around the room, I see how you are.
Yes. With respect to what Marty was saying about the genius of the place, speaking as a visitor from the visiting area for a long time, but I think fairly active. Part of the genius is that the Divinity School and the people here are encouraged to communicate beyond the academic community in various ways, and Marty said is a great example of that. And the other thing I would say that I think is the belief in, I know they debate free will all the time in the class, but free imagination, which there isn't such a thing, makes the question of free will kind of move. But free imagination, which I think characterizes the place as much as anything. And if it's not an opinion, I'm going to just quote and just point to somebody who's not from this Divinity School, and it's likely appropriate because he is Stanley Howard's. And he said, something I listened to recently, that the reason America doesn't produce very many interesting atheists is because the God that most Americans say they believe in is too uninteresting to deny. I think the great genius in this place is recognizing there are some not theistic religions that are studied in depth here as well. That what goes on here is a convex phenomenon that comes back out.
John Hodgson.
When I came here, I lived in a place called the Baptist House, 49th and
Baptist Graduate Student Center.
Baptist Graduate
Student Center.
Student Center. Okay. What is that? What is the connection? Is there a connection with the Divinity School and that place? And I don't think it's in existence anymore. Is it?
Private residence. It was the Rosenwald mansion.
Oh yeah.
Who was the president of Sears Roebuck, and very devoted to the university.
Now, as I recall, there were not many women students living there. Mostly men. Well, I'm thinking about the connection with women and the university. So I did not see many women, as I think about it, who lived there.
Yeah, I was the director of it once.
Mm-hmm. Well, you would know.
So my reputation is not sterling on this point.
No. I was just thinking about that in relationship to all these women, which I didn't see when I was here. I'm sure, That's
I think it is the case. Check me on this, David and Bernie and Marty. But Vatican II also saw an influx of not just Catholic students, but women students, women religious. In a divinity school, Andrew Greedy's sister, Mary, was the first, and that was in practice or whatever. But yes, Vatican II, I remember Father Bernard Cook in the Marquette group, nine came with master's degrees. Jill Ray, Ann Carr, who became Associate Dean. It was very exciting. It was pent-up. They weren't really allowed to study theology away from Catholic schools until Vatican II. The great change. Is that a fair characterization, Professor Casey and Meyer?
I'd say it's fair.
Yes.
Does anybody besides me remember the Divine Wives? No? When we first came, he remembers. She remembers. Carol Jean, you probably know it better than I. Why don't you say what they do? No, actually, I didn't know what they do. Well, when the Divinity School students were all men and the faculty were all men, the wives of the faculty tried to help the wives of the students. And that was the point of the Divine Wives, as far as I understand. And they had a picnic every spring. I remember going to that. I remember they asked me to be president, and I said I didn't even want to belong to it.
I used to hang out with the Lutheran group on campus, Divinity mainly, and they wanted to have Paul Zilli come. And so Jerry Brower went up to him and Zilli said, I won't try the accent, how many of them are women? But and Brower said he had an eye for a well-turned ankle. So we didn't get much theology from him.
Oh, yes, please, go ahead.
You've spoken about the philosophical underpinnings of the foundation of the Divinity School. Could you talk about whether or not our Divinity School here was an early adopter of the study of other religions? Obviously, we were founded with Protestant underpinnings, and Harper was a student of Judaica. But when did we bring in the study of many other religions and religious traditions, and were we an early adopter of those?
The study of university-wide, they were very, on the elevator today in the Dominican Center. Oh, you're all dressed up in maroon, you must be going to university. Yeah. And I said, you ever hear of Eustace Hayden? And he was the real founder here, I think, of world religious study. It wasn't divinity yet, but he was part of it there. Everyone know who that was, our favorite senior in the building. Eustace Hayden was a very big part of it. I won't say we were the pioneer everywhere, but several phases came. I think the first big round came with a writer of Joachim Bach, who really, 42nd, yeah, he really generated the field. And then Moshe Eliade came, and then, Wendy, when did you come? Later. All the stories we could tell. I remember a story about Professor Downing. She had given a lecture here, and all the anthropologists were here, and they didn't like it. It's religion. And then when Kitagawa was policy committee was trying to lure her here, got her to speak. first hall was jammed full with students who were curious about it, possibly anthropologists. And I remember your lecture began, 4 years ago I was here, and I gave a lecture, and anthropologists didn't like it. I've come here today to refute it. And she did, and they voted for you.
A couple of quick comments on the last question that Mike can answer. One is, I believe I got this right, but one of the original Divinity School faculty, George Vernon Foster, actually had to deal extensively in the early 20th century with charges of being heretical and taking seriously Buddhist philosophy and its interest in theology. But it is true that the study of other religions in comparison and all is a later event here. But there certainly was that spirit of fermentation earlier in various ways. We have time for one more, and then
Just to add to that, I think other universities had the kind of interreligious dialogue programs. We had somebody teaching Buddhism, we had somebody teaching Hinduism. Not many of them, but some did. But it was Bach and Eliade who invented the science of the scientific study of religions in comparison with one another, rather than just individuals saying, I'm a Buddhist, I'd like to talk to you, you're a Christian. That science really began here.
So I'm in charge of making sure that we're on time, and so I'm going to call a close to comments and questions at least. And I'm going to do a couple things. First of all, taking Dan's helpful 1890, 1891, 1892 division order, I want to invoke 1890 first and ask all the members of the Baptist Theological Union and all the members of the visiting committee to stand. In the BTU or the visiting committee, this may be hard for some of you because of the Secondly, I want to invoke 1891, and I want to ask all the members of the faculty, and that includes emeritus, to please stand. Okay, 1892. I want to ask all the students who are here to stand. Now, that isn't quite everybody, but I have a wonderful witness to Pat McGinn that there are others of you who are associated with one group or another, and I know from my time here that you're all part of this community too. Jim Lewis, former dean of students, and his wife Marcia are here, etc. So all of you who haven't stood but are part of this community, you can name your own year when you stand, but please stand. One of the things you learn when you're digging around here is that when you say Chicago, you're saying all those things. So thanks to all for being here. So I'm going to turn the microphone over for a minute to Carolyn Engel, who is a second-year Master of Arts student, who has an announcement to make to us today. Carolyn?
Good evening. I am a representative of the Divinity Students Association, and on behalf of all of the students, I am proud and pleased to introduce our initiative to honor the Divinity School in honor of its 150th anniversary. In the past century and a half, the Divinity School has stood, as we've learned tonight, as a seed of a new university and a place of problematics and mysteries and conversations, as well as a roundtable and living museum and a symbol for democratic social change. So as students, faculty, alumni, and administrators, we are all aware that we are just temporary residents here, inhabiting each of those different spheres. We are renters, charged with the upkeep of a house of education that extends beyond our own lifetimes and our own careers. And yet we offer a piece of ourselves through our words and our ideas, our publications, expectations and our actions. Benjamin Elijah Mays, a 1935 graduate of the Divinity School and president of Morehouse College in the decades leading up to the Civil Rights Movement, is no exception to that pattern. We, the students of the Divinity Students Association, have commissioned a portrait of Benjamin Mays for display in the common room downstairs, next to the mentors and the movers and shakers of this institution. With this gift, we hope to honor his work inspiring nonviolent democratic change in our country and rigorous discussions about race in our classrooms. In addition to being a published author and ordained Baptist minister, Benjamin Mays was an incredibly influential civic leader. He served in the National YMCA, the Federal Council of Churches, and the Atlanta School Board. And just before completing his dissertation here at the Divinity School, he was hired as dean at the Howard University School of Religion, and 5 years later as president of Morehouse College, a position which he held for almost 30 years. As university president, Mays reinvigorated the Morehouse institution as a center for the debates about the emerging democratic social movements of the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And he calibrated that university's liberal arts education to garner immediate social impact. He did this through weekly chapel services and one-on-one mentoring sessions in which he encouraged students to challenge the racial stereotypes that were so prevalent at the time. Through his professional example, he demonstrated how to survive mentally and spiritually as a leader in a hostile social environment. And through his publications, he urged his fellow Americans of color to support integration, not because they felt insecure or inferior, but because they had a religiously motivated identity of worth. Pursuing the issues in these many different ways, Mays influenced a generation of African American students who would become leaders in the civil rights movement. For this reason, I think it's Mays, at least, would find it fitting that his legacy remains tied to the work of his students, most notably Martin Luther King Jr., whom he met in 1944 when King began his academic career at Morehouse. Mays' impact on King was so great that King referred to Mays as his own spiritual mentor, and Mays delivered the eulogy at King's funeral. The portrait of Mays, in my view, will do two important things. On the one hand, it is a long overdue artifact honoring the history of successful alumni of this institution. Many of you are here tonight. The Divinity School honors distinguished alums each year, and Mays was honored by that award in 1944. But the portrait, I think, in some way is a stronger claim and a longer-lasting expression of our pride in his success both academically and socially. On the other hand, the portrait will do some symbolic work in its recognition of our often overlooked, but nonetheless colorful past, and our commitments today to diversity in our community. We hope that the portrait will honor the significance of Mays' career while also contributing to a renewed and rigorous conversation about inclusivity, collegiality, activism. We may do this by drawing on Mays' willingness to press on those difficult topics that, when breached, have the potential to build stronger communities. By nature of being a student and alumni gift, we have solicited funds for this portrait from a variety of sources. The Divinity Students Association contributed a portion of the funds, and alongside student fundraising and a matching gift, we have now raised almost $11,000. When the Alumni Council heard about this project, its 12 members quickly raised $2,500, and we have received independent gifts from several distinguished alums, including Peter Paris and Robert Franklin. These individuals and group want us to succeed in bringing this project to life and in leaving a lasting impression on the Divinity School, not only in its aesthetics, but in its lineage, spirit. So we raised almost $13,500 of the $18,000 that we need to complete the portrait. So I turn to you now as visiting committee members and alumni to ask for your financial support. If you're interested in giving, you can make a check with one of the development office staff or myself, or a pledge cards outside here. You may also give online through our website, dsa.uchicago.edu. There's a link at the bottom of the biographical page on Mays. There's also a video of some of the students and administrators talking about the many sort of embedded layers that lead to this project. and I encourage you to take a look at those. In closing, let me just say that I think that this portrait can serve as a meaningful representation of the pride that this significant anniversary celebration generates in our academic community. With that, I want to thank you for your time and consideration.
Two more quick things. First of all, you will notice, and partly behind the bar over here, but I suppose it's appropriate, that the bookcases here over the years have accumulated, and what they've accumulated are faculty publications and journals published at the University of Chicago. And it's a real pleasure just to acknowledge today the arrival of some books which are in a bookcase over here to the south end from Joe Price, which are given faculty-authored books, which will soon join the collection there. So thanks to Joe for that, which is a great impact for us. So the formal program ends here. Two quick things. One is, I do want to take this chance to thank Dale Walker, Barbara Palmer-Bostic, and Linda Aldrich, who made this happen. They're all standing there. We're now just about ready to close, and my notes say I have to exhort you to refresh your drinks. We have about 30 to 40 minutes for just time to relax and talk, and why don't we close by thanking our panelists for the future.